Okay, so hello everybody, welcome. I am Susanne Lohmann. I am the chair of the faculty selection committee for the speakers. I'm introducing David Pinsof today, who holds a PhD from UCLA. So he studied psychology and biological anthropology with a specialization on evolutionary psychology. And today we are seeing evolutionary psychology in action on the origins of political belief systems. I also want to mention that you are the CEO of Cards, co-founder of Cards Against Humanity. And I've also found out, just talking to him, that he has written on jokes and what's funny. So maybe he'll talk about that a little bit also. Thank you.
All right. Well, having seen this title, The Alliance Theory of Political Belief Systems, you might have some questions running through your head, like, for example, what is an alliance? Or how does this quote unquote alliance theory shed light on political belief systems? Well, the first half of this talk will cover the first question. And this is going to be covering new stuff, a working paper on the evolutionary game theory of alliances. And the second half will cover the second question. And this is mainly going to draw from my 2023 paper with Marty Hazelton and David Sears called Strange Bedfellows, The Alliance Theory of Political Belief Systems. So let's start with part one. What are alliances? To better get a sense of what they are, we are going to play a little game with each other right now. The players are you, me, and Bob. I don't know Bob. You don't know Bob. Bob is just a stranger who's here to play the game with us. Okay, here's how the game works. You have to choose between me and Bob. Sorry, I have to choose between you and Bob. You have to choose between me and Bob. And Bob has to choose between you and me. If any two of us mutually choose each other, those two players win 1 point, and the excluded third player loses 1 point. So, for example, if you and I choose each other, we win a point, Bob loses a point. If Bob and I choose each other, we win a point, you lose a point. If you and Bob choose each other, you win, I lose. And if we each choose one of the other players, forming a kind of love triangle, then none of us get anything, we all get 0. The point of the game is mutual choice. Okay, you know how the game works. It's time to make your choice. Please silently, in your head, choose between me and Bob. I will choose between you and Bob in my head. And please try to win the game. Take it seriously. Okay. Has everyone made their choice? Okay. Raise your hand if you chose Bob. Oh, a few of you. Interesting. What's the logic behind your choice there? Curious. Sorry? Totally random. Interesting strategy. Okay. First choice. Okay, randomness. We'll get to randomness as a possible strategy in this game. Okay, raise your hand if you chose me. Okay, so it seems like the majority of you are going with me. Well, for those of you who chose me, congratulations. I chose you too. We win a point, and Bob loses a point. So for those of you who did choose me, why did you choose me? I'm guessing it's probably because you don't know Bob, and I don't know Bob, and you know that I don't know Bob, and I know that you know that I don't know Bob because I told you. So picking me somehow feels like the safer bet, doesn't it? We have some common ground. Also, we're more similar to each other than we are to Bob. We're interested in mathematical approaches to the social science. Bob, in all likelihood, is not. So these strategies you used, similarity, knowing who the other one knows, are good strategies in this game. So what is this game? It's called the simple majority game. It has been a staple in the international relations literature for decades. Versions of it have been used in political science, and it helps us define really precisely what an alliance is. An alliance is what you and I did just now, or at least those of you who didn't betray me and chose me in the game. An alliance is a coordinated, mutually beneficial relationship that comes at a cost to others. So we played with 1, 0, and -1 as the three possible outcomes. But the absolute values or magnitudes of these numbers do not actually matter for our purposes. To qualify as a simple majority game, all that matters is that the outcomes are ranked in the following order. Number 1, forming an alliance. That is the best possible outcome. Number 2, nobody forms an alliance, or we form a love triangle. That is the intermediate level outcome. And number 3, exclusion from an alliance. That is the worst possible outcome. So you might be wondering, do people actually play this game in real life? Is this relevant to human social behavior? I think the answer is yes, and we're going to look at some examples. So my favorite example is inspired by the 2019 film The Favorite, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. And here's how the favoritism game works. It's a 3-player game. And if any 2 players favor each other, they provide each other with special benefits that they don't provide to the third. So for example, they might praise each other while dissing the third player behind their back. Or they might share secrets with each other that they don't share with the third player. Or they might invite each other to cool parties that they don't invite the third player to. Or they take each other's side in conflicts against the third player should either of them get into a fight with the third player. The 2 favorites gain a benefit from doing this, which we will define with the parameter v. V can be as big or as small as you want it to be, it doesn't matter. And the excluded third player pays a cost from this, which we're going to define as -c. So here we are at the start of the game. Here's what happens if you and I form an alliance against Bob. Bob is not very happy about this. So the payoffs are ranked in the right order. Forming an alliance is the best outcome, nobody forms an alliance is the intermediate outcome, and exclusion is the worst outcome. Here's another example, the grabbing game. We each have a resource, V. If no alliance forms, we each keep our resource. If an alliance forms, the 2 allies grab the third player's resource and split it between themselves. We assume that the third player submits to the alliance without a fight, out of fear, or perhaps with fighting costs lower than the value of the resource split 2 ways. So here we are at the start of the game, each with our own private resource, V, and here's what happens if you and I form an alliance against Bob and take his resource. Again, we have a simple majority game. The best outcome is forming an alliance. The intermediate outcome is if nobody forms an alliance. And the worst outcome is if you're excluded from an alliance. This might be the most relevant game for our purposes. This is inspired by a mathematical model by the political scientist Kathleen Vaughan. It's called the policy game. We each want to pass a policy that provides a benefit to us, V, while inflicting a cost, -c, on others. For example, I want to pass a tariff that protects my business from foreign competition while increasing prices for you and Bob. You want to pay off your student loan debt using tax dollars from me and Bob. Bob wants to remove regulations on his factory so he can pollute the air that you and I breathe. We assume that V is greater than C, that is, the benefits to the policy stakeholder are larger than the costs inflicted on others, which are often hard to detect. So here we are at the start of the policy game with our preferred policies. And here's what happens if you and I form a political alliance or a political party and pass our preferred policy agenda. So again, the best outcome is forming an alliance or perhaps a political party. The intermediate outcome is if nobody successfully forms an alliance. And the worst outcome is if you're excluded from an alliance or if your preferred political party loses and gets disempowered. So this is what I think is the most interesting example of the simple majority game in action, the witch hunt game. So let's assume that we're all certain that one of us is a witch. We will keep making and denying allegations until one of us is found guilty. Guilty just means that two players agree that the third player is the witch. The third player doesn't actually have to be a witch. At the start of the game, we each have a 1/3 chance of being found guilty. So here we are at the start of the game with a cloud of suspicion hanging over our heads in the form of -1/3 C. And here is what happens if you and I form an alliance against Bob and accuse him of witchcraft. So again, we have a simple majority game. And what's interesting about the witch hunt game is that the best outcome is actually 0. But it still counts as a simple majority game because the 3 outcomes are ranked in the right order. So let's talk about evolutionarily stable strategies. In evolutionary game theory, an evolutionarily stable strategy is a strategy that is selected for relative to alternative strategies, or to an alternative strategy. We not only want to know how the strategy performs, we want to know how it performs when it's rare and when it's common. Why? Because in evolution, when strategies perform well, they become more common. They proliferate. And that proliferation changes the strategic landscape. If a strategy performs well when it's rare and increases in frequency, we say it invades the population. If a strategy invades when it's rare and it resists invasion when it's common, we say it is an evolutionarily stable strategy, or an ESS. So now that we know what that is, we can ask the question, is it an ESS to form alliances? It would be nice if the answer was no. This is all rather unpleasant stuff, isn't it? Ganging up on others to take their stuff, siding against them in conflicts, burning them at the stake. It's not nice. Has evolution doomed us to a life of alliances? To find out, we're going to compare 2 strategies in the simple majority game, allies and neutrals. Allies play the game. They choose another player at random. So if Bob is an ally, he's going to choose at random between you and me. Neutrals refuse to play the game. They choose neither player. In the arena of natural selection, which strategy wins? To find out, we're going to look at the favoritism game because it's mathematically the simplest. And we're going to let A be the percentage of allies in the population, which means that A minus 1 is the percentage of neutrals. And here it is, the tragedy of the human condition in math, as I like to think of it. On the left side are the net payoffs for allies, depending on the frequency of each strategy. And on the right side of the inequality are the net payoffs for neutrals, depending on the frequency of each strategy. This math looks way more complicated than it is. I assure you it's actually quite simple. Let me walk you through it piece by piece. So this part right here, that's just what happens if an ally is in a triad with 2 other neutrals, which happens 1 minus a squared % of the time. In that case, nobody gets anything. This is what happens if an ally is in a triad with 1 other ally and 1 neutral. In that case, the 2 allies will form an alliance a quarter of the time. This is what happens if an ally is in a triad with 2 other allies, in which case they'll form an alliance half the time and get ganged up on by the other 2 a quarter of the time. This is what happens if a neutral is with 2 neutrals, they get nothing. This is when a neutral is with 1 ally and 1 neutral, still nobody gets anything. And this is when a neutral is with 2 allies, in which case they get ganged up on by those allies a quarter of the time. And so this seemingly complicated math can actually be simplified to this bit of math. VA is greater than 0. We have already stipulated this to be true, which means that allies are sadly an ESS. So why are allies an ESS? Well, there are benefits to forming an alliance. Neutrals miss out on these benefits. Yes, there are costs to getting ganged up on too, and those costs can be quite severe. But here's the important part. Neutrals are just as likely to suffer these costs as allies. Neither strategy can control whether the other two players form an alliance against them. So the strategies have the same expected costs, and the cost terms actually cancel out in the math. The costs don't matter. They could be as high as death, in theory. Which means the higher these costs, the more the entire species becomes worse off as allies invade and remain stable. But it doesn't matter because evolution does not care about the good of the species. It only cares about the relative frequency of genes. So this is a bummer, but I also think it has important implications. I used the payoffs for the favoritism game, but I could have picked any of the games we looked at. Since the payoffs are ranked in the same order across all those games, the math actually works out the same for all those games. Which means it is an ESS to accuse each other of witchcraft in the witch hunt game, grab each other's stuff in the grabbing game, and form political alliances to advance each other's agendas, which might include grabbing each other's stuff and accusing each other of witchcraft. In other words, it pays to form alliances even if you're choosing allies at random. So we've arrived at our first of many ESSs. Play the game. Here's our second ESS. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You're probably familiar with this ancient proverb. It also happens to be an ESS in the simple majority game. But why? To answer this question, we're going to look at a 5-player favoritism game. The goal of this game is to form a special clique, an exclusive trio that provides special benefits to each other. Let's call the people who favor the enemies of their enemies in this game uniters. We're going to compare the payoffs of uniters to the payoffs of allies. So here's the scenario. You and I are friends, and we are enemies of Bob. Denise is also enemies of Bob. She is the enemy of our enemy. Ava is neither friends nor enemies with anyone. In this scenario, uniters will always choose Denise over Ava because Denise is the enemy of their enemy. Allies, on the other hand, will be indifferent between Denise and Ava. Remember, they're choosing allies at random. Denise will be open to a special trio with you and me. She'll also be open to a trio with you and Ava or me and Ava. So if we choose Denise, we'll have a 1/3 chance that she'll get on board with us. But if we choose Ava, we'll actually have a 1/6 chance that she'll get on board with us because she's going to consider all 6 possible trios. Now, what if uniters become more common? Well, if Denise is a uniter like us, we now have a 100% chance of forming an alliance with Denise because we are the enemies of her enemy, just as she is the enemy of our enemy. So uniters do better when allies when they're rare, and they especially do better when they're common, which means they're an ESS. Here are some other similar ESSs, which we might call axioms of transitivity. The friend of my enemy is my enemy. You're a communist sympathizer, you're a communist. You're a Nazi sympathizer, you're a Nazi. The enemy of my friend is my enemy. You piss off my friend, you piss off me. The friend of my friend is my friend. Any friend of yours is a friend of mine. We can demonstrate that these are also ESSs in the simple majority game, and I've outlined the scenarios for the minimum possible group size for when this strategy is an ESS. So we might wonder why. Why transitivity? The answer is simple: coordination. There is a vast space of possible alliances to choose from. Zeroing in on the same alliance as other agents is a formidable challenge. Insofar as we have the same friends and enemies, we'll want to include and exclude the same people in our alliance. We'll have a smaller number of alliances to choose from, which means we're more likely to choose an alliance that includes each other. There's more overlap in our preferred space of alliances, which means choosing each other is a safer bet. And if we know it's a safer bet, it becomes an even safer bet. Here's another interesting ESS. If you're like me, you're my friend. We typically choose allies who are like us. They might talk like us or dress like us. Why? Why do we do this? To find out, we're going to consider a liker strategy. Likers choose the player who is like them. If both players are like them or neither player is like them, they revert to an ally strategy, choosing at random. We're going to continue with the favoritism game because it's mathematically simpler. So let's assume that you and I are alike in some way. We're both blue and Bob is green. And we're going to suppose that you are a rare mutant liker. In this case, you're always going to choose me because I'm blue. How does your strategy do? Well, half the time, I'm going to choose you in return if I'm an ally. And quarter of the time, I'll gang up with Bob against you. And a quarter of the time, we'll form a love triangle and nothing will happen. So likers actually have the same payoffs as allies, which means that they neither do better or worse. They could potentially drift in by chance. So now suppose that they do drift in a bit by chance. Suppose likers get a bit more common. Interesting things start to happen here. So now suppose that I'm a liker. We will now have a 100% chance of forming an alliance. That is a pretty powerful strategic advantage. We've doubled our odds of forming an alliance. And what's interesting about this strategy is that this strategic advantage stays the same. In fact, it grows the larger the group size is, because in larger groups, likers are solving an even larger coordination problem. And so we can actually demonstrate this mathematically, that likers are an ESS. When they're rare, they do the same as allies. But if even a small number of them drift in, they begin forming alliances with one another, and they do especially well when they're in large groups and when there are lots of them to get together. So it is obvious to anyone who's lived on this planet that like attracts like. Birds of a feather flock together. This isn't exactly news. But can we say something more than this? Does the model predict what specific types of similarity will lead to alliances? I think it does. We can say 4 things, in fact. Similarity should be common knowledge, salient, categorical, and exclusive. Let's start with common knowledge. Common knowledge is a very important term in game theory. Thomas et al. Defines it as the recursive belief state in which A knows X, B knows X, A knows that B knows X, B knows that A knows X, ad infinitum. It's basically everyone knows that everyone knows something. Players need common knowledge when they're trying to coordinate for mutual benefit. For example, if we're all trying to get together at the same time and place, everyone needs to know that everyone knows the time and place. The simple majority game is, in part, a coordination game. We've already defined an alliance as a coordinated, mutually beneficial relationship that comes at a cost to others. So for the liker strategy to work, the players need common knowledge that they are alike. To illustrate, let's suppose you're deciding whether or not to choose me as an ally. You might be wondering, does he know that we're both blue? Does he know that I know that we're both blue? Does he know that I know that he knows that we're both blue? If the answer to any of these questions is no, then you can no longer count on me to choose you in return, and your strategy becomes useless. So we need common knowledge of the similarity in order for this strategy to work. This brings me to the second thing, salient. If we have the same tattoo, it won't help us form an alliance if it's covered up by our clothing. Or if the tattoo is visible to us, it won't help us if neither of us notices it. The similarity should be top of mind. Ideally, it should be associated with the simple majority game that we're playing right now. For example, if we're playing the witch hunt game, it will really help us coordinate if we both share the trait hates witches, and we know that the other one knows that the other one knows that we hate witches. If we're playing the grabbing game, it will really help us if we share the trait deserves more stuff. If we're playing the policy game, it will really help us coordinate if we share the trait Democrat or Republican. Categorical. If we're trying to form an alliance of tall people, that's going to be hard. Height is a continuous variable. How tall counts as tall? Am I tall enough? I'm pretty tall, not super tall. This blurriness makes it hard for us to coordinate on who's alike and who's not, especially if we need to create common knowledge of who's alike and who's not. Examples of categorical variables that are often used to form alliances include race. You have dark skin or light skin, residence, you live in the north or the south, the east or the west, you wear the yarmulke or you don't, you worship our God or you don't, you vote for our party or you don't. Exclusive. If everyone is blue, the liker strategy is useless. We won't know whom to favor as our allies. For the strategy to pay off, some people have to be blue and some people don't. Unfortunately, a lot of traits are easy to mimic. You could easily wear all blue and paint your face blue. This creates a copycat problem. So now let's return to the game we were playing, and we're all getting ready to choose whose side we're on. And Bob says, hang on, let me slip into something more comfortable. And he returns in all blue. Bob has thrown a wrench into our strategy. What this means, I think, is that conformity, the copying of others, can be a defensive strategy in the simple majority game. If you want to prevent others from ganging up on you, it's good to blend in and conform. Here's another interesting hypothesis that emerged from this analysis. Might nostalgia be a solution to the copycat problem? That is, forming alliances based on shared history. Nostalgia is a good tactic because you cannot change the past. A shared experience cannot be imitated by anyone else. The past is also categorical. You were either there or you weren't. And it's exclusive. Not everyone was there. And if you're a newcomer to our group, then you almost certainly weren't there. Then again, the one problem with the strategy is that the past is not necessarily salient. We sometimes forget about the past. But it can be salient if we make it salient by actively reminiscing about it together and reminding each other of our shared experiences so that they're always top of mind. Remember all we've been through together. This might be one of the functions of nostalgia. Nostalgia provides the motivation to reminisce with other people, the better to forge alliances with them when we need to. As we know, nostalgia has been quite popular politically. Trump's campaign slogan is Make America Great Again, not Make America Great. The slogan is referring to a bygone era. It is a very nostalgic slogan. The historian Anne Applebaum has actually documented uses of nostalgia in a variety of countries around the world. It's a common political tactic in nationalist movements, and the goal of those movements, not coincidentally, is to exclude newcomers, immigrants, and ethnic minorities from the political alliance. Nostalgia helps them do this because it is exclusive. You lack our shared history. This is a very nice segue, or not so nice segue, into ESS 8. Follow the leader. Suppose everyone loves Bob for some reason. Maybe he's good at mimicking us or reminiscing with us. Maybe he's good at convincing us that he loves our allies and hates our enemies. If this is true, then we're going to favor him in all of the simple majority games I just talked about. We'll assume he's not a witch in the witch hunt game. We'll assume he deserves his resources in the grabbing game. If Bob supports a policy in the policy game, we're going to reflexively support it. If Bob says he hates someone, we're going to hate them because an enemy of Bob's is an enemy of ours. And if he says he loves someone, we're going to love them because any friend of Bob's is a friend of ours. By amassing many allies, Bob has, for all intents and purposes, become a leader. The intriguing implication here is that leadership actually emerges naturally as a byproduct of alliances. It's not a special category. It's just what happens when you have a lot of allies who are loyal to you. ESS 9, target your competitors. So there are many cases where someone's loss is your gain. Suppose we're competing over territory. Reducing your access to it increases mine. Or suppose we're competing over a mate, and hurting you lowers your chances with that mate and increases mine. In these cases, a cost to you might actually be a benefit for me. So when someone is a competitor, it is an ESS to target them. To illustrate why, let's assume we're playing the witch hunt game and we're trying to figure out who is a witch. And let's assume that Bob and I are competing for the same mate. In this case, it's really a no-brainer. I should accuse Bob of witchcraft. Interestingly, there is some empirical evidence that people actually use this strategy. So this is a really interesting paper published in Scientific Reports a few years ago, and it looked at witchcraft accusations in sub-Saharan Africa, where witchcraft beliefs are still quite common. And the authors write that male witches were mostly accused in connections to disputes over wealth and status. Accusations against women were mainly from kin by marriage, and particularly from husbands and co-wives. So these are polygynous societies where there are multiple wives per husband. In this case, the wives are competing for the resources of the husband. There's mating competition. What this suggests is that in a real-life witch hunt game, people are pursuing this strategy of targeting their competitors. There's also some interesting research on witchcraft accusations and status. Here's a handful of papers on that topic. Here are some quotes. Due to the fear of witchcraft accusations, witchcraft, with envy having the stronger effect. Success, or lack thereof, is thought to be closely associated with witchcraft and magic. If a person succeeds, they are accused of using witchcraft to become wealthy. This brings us to ESS 10, Eat the Rich. Recall the grabbing game. We assumed there was perfect equality between the players. We all had V equals V. This assumption often does not hold in real life. Often, resources are distributed unequally. So what if there was inequality in our little scenario? Let's say Bob now has twice as much stuff as us, and we all know that we all know that. Suddenly, the strategic landscape has radically changed. Is it just me, or is there something kind of off about Bob? He's just been acting really rude lately. I don't know. Maybe we should form an alliance against him. There, that's better. So why does envy breed alliances? To find out, we're going to consider a new strategy, envier. When one player has extra stuff, enviers try to form an alliance against that player. And we're going to let E be the amount of extra stuff that one player in a group of size n has, where E is greater than 1. And the alliances we'll be considering are n-1 against 1. And there are 3 possible outcomes. You get the other person's stuff if you form an alliance. If you don't, you get nothing. And if you're targeted, you lose your stuff. And we can demonstrate that enviers are ESSs. Mathematically, this is quite similar to the logic behind the Likert strategy. But interestingly, enviers actually do better than allies right off the bat. unlike likers. And we can get into why. So why are enviers in ESS? Well, two reasons. One, they grab more stuff. VE is greater than V. Also, they're better able to coordinate on whose stuff to grab. The dissimilarity where one person is conspicuously wealthier, that functions as a different kind of coordination device, not unlike blue and green. Forming an alliance is better than not forming an alliance. Those are the two reasons they do well. Qualifications. There are many. We don't always eat the rich, of course. We sometimes admire them. It depends on what caused their wealth. What if their wealth was caused by their superior skills, wisdom, or work ethic? If so, then targeting them would mean burning a valuable relationship, and the witch hunt came perhaps literally. We'd be alienating a superior partner. So whether we eat the rich depends on whether we think they deserve their riches. Other qualifications. Whether we eat the rich depends on whether they're similar to us, whether they're in competition with us, whether they support our allies or oppose our enemies, and common knowledge of all of the above. Also, the resource being grabbed doesn't have to be money or material goods. It could be social status. It could be political power itself. And the rich don't have to be better off at an absolute level. They just need to be better off than us. It's about relative advantages, relative position. So we've covered 10 ESSs now. Why does any of this matter? I think it matters because our ancestors almost certainly played this game. We know this because our chimpanzee cousins play it, social primates play it, every known hunter-gatherer society has had alliances and coalitions of various kinds. Our ancestors likely played this game with one another many, many times throughout our evolutionary history. The winners would have left more descendants than the losers, and you and I are likely to be descended from the winners, which means we have inherited their winning strategies, which I suspect includes the 10 ESSs we just covered. We have an evolved alliance psychology. Let's take a look at this alliance psychology from a bird's eye view. We choose allies based on similarity, and the similarity should be exclusive, salient, common knowledge, and perhaps nostalgic. We choose allies based on transitivity. We like the enemy of our enemy. We dislike the friend of our enemies and the enemies of our friends. And we like the friends of our friends. Interdependence. When we're both in competition with someone, that's going to bring us together. When we're both unfairly advantaged relative to someone else, that is going to bring us together. If we prefer the same policies in the policy game, that is going to bring us together. Of course, it's not just about choosing allies, it's about actually supporting them and advancing their interests. So what do we do after we've chosen our allies? Well, we might accuse their enemies of transgressions, whether it be witchcraft or any other kind of hard to verify transgression. And this is where conspiracy theories might come in. We might deny that our allies are guilty of transgressions that they are accused of, or we might try to downplay their responsibility for them or how bad they were. We might say that our allies' enemies' advantages are unfair, they're undeserved, they were gotten through deception or treachery. We might say that our allies' advantages, on the other hand, are perfectly fair and just. They got them fair and square through hard work and talent. We might say our allies' policies are wonderful and they're going to make the world a better place and improve the national welfare. We might say our enemies' policies are terrible and they're going to be a catastrophe for everyone. In my 2023 paper, I refer to this collection of biases as propagandistic biases. We spin propaganda to support our allies in political conflicts. I think this is a more perspicuous way of looking at these biases than motivated reasoning per se. So here it is, just to recap again, our sketch of human alliance psychology. We choose allies based on similarity, transitivity, and interdependence, and we support our allies by denying or downplaying their transgressions, justifying their advantages, supporting their policies, and demonizing their enemies. So this is it. This is alliance theory. These are the assumptions of the approach. I think we can explain a lot about our political belief systems just by taking on board these assumptions, which not only have strong theoretical support, but also strong empirical support, as I review in the paper. Okay, let's look at contemporary politics. Let's take a look at strange bedfellows. So according to alliance theory, political belief systems are ultimately explained by political alliance structures. What is a political alliance structure? It's the set of groups widely associated with a political label. For example, corporate CEOs are right-coded. The LGBTQ community is left-coded. Political alliance structures vary across cultures and time periods based on demographic similarities, race, religion, residence. We've talked about this. Conflicts over status or resources, like in the grabbing game. Electoral strategies, follow the leader. We've talked about this. Politicians try to mobilize coalitions and bring strange bedfellows together. And transitivity, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. These are the factors that shape how alliance structures form. And this is a good way of depicting or getting a sense of the political alliance structure in the United States. So this is from a study conducted by Mark Brandt and colleagues. So on the x-axis is the degree to which the groups in question are perceived as either liberal or conservative. And on the y-axis is the degree to which conservatives hate the group more than liberals or show dislike toward the group more than liberals. So among the groups that are rated as liberal and are liked by liberals, we have radical students, atheists, labor unions, gays and lesbians, environmentalists, feminists, people on welfare, and poor people. Among the groups favored by conservatives and rated as conservatives are Christian fundamentalists, anti-abortionists, business people, the military, wealthy people, elderly people, men, whites. Here's another way of depicting the alliance structure. This is from a study conducted by Larry Bartels and colleagues. So the x-axis is the average rating of all these groups by Democrats. The y-axis is the average rating among Republicans. Among the groups liked more by Democrats include journalists, labor unions, United Nations, interesting one, Muslims, college professors, people on food stamps, Google, scientists. Among the groups liked by Republicans include the National Rifle Association, Fox News, of course, wealthy people, farmers, construction workers, police officers, the military again. So how can we summarize this alliance structure? Well, on the left, the Liberal Democrat Alliance, we have something like college professors and students, the mainstream media, atheists or non-religious people, quote unquote, big government, environmentalists, single mothers / unmarried people, single mothers was another one of the groups, feminists or women, ethnic minorities or immigrants, Muslims, or low-income people or welfare recipients. On the right, we have rural people, Southerners, devout Christians, big business, traditional families, low education people, the white working class, men or anti-feminists, gun owners, police officers, the military, and perhaps speculatively anti-woke counter elites. It isn't in the graph, but I suspect this is correct. So is this just about status? Maybe this alliance structure reflects just who is high status or powerful relative to who is low status or oppressed in society. This is tough to argue. There are many high status groups on the left side. For example, the mainstream media, scientists, Google, Hollywood movie stars, the United Nations, college professors, quote unquote, big government. And there are many low status groups on the right side, including rural people, low education people, manufacturing workers, and the quote unquote white working class. And there are many groups that are just very difficult to categorize by status. For example, devout Christians, environmentalists, college students, Southerners, gun owners, non-religious people. It's really unclear whether these groups are high status or low status, and yet they are very strongly politically coded. In case you're not convinced of this, there's a wonderful paper by Mark Brandt published in Psych Science, where he looks at what explains that graph we just looked at. What explains whether liberals or conservatives like a group more? Brandt looked at moderators of the relationship between ideology and prejudice toward a variety of groups. Brandt compared 6 different statistical models. The ideology-only model used the ideology of the group as the moderator. So according to this model, liberals like the liberal groups, conservatives like the conservative groups. The status-only model used the status of the group as the moderator. According to this model, conservatives like the high-status groups, liberals like the low-status groups. What he found was that the ideology-only model was 3 to 6 times more predictive than the status-only model across a variety of samples. And crucially, adding status as a variable to the ideology-only model added no additional predictive power. It's looking like the simpler, more elegant model is the correct one. So if it's not status or who's in power or who's not, then what is the deeper pattern to this alliance structure? How can we explain how all these groups hang together in the way they do in the United States in the year 2025? Well, we might ask the same question about a female friend group at a local high school. Why is Kayla besties with Avery while Mia is frenemies with Avery and Kayla told Avery about her crush? Or we can ask the same question about the alliance structure in a chimpanzee society. If you haven't seen the Netflix docuseries Chimp Empire, I highly recommend it. So there are many alliances and betrayals in this docuseries. We might ask the question, why did Jackson form an alliance with Miles and not Abrams? And why did Abrams share meat with Gus but not Miles and Jackson? Or we might ask the same question about the alliance structure in Game of Thrones. This is a diagram made by a superfan of Game of Thrones, mapping all the alliances and betrayals between the different characters and the different houses in Game of Thrones. So we might ask, what is the deeper pattern here? What I want to argue is that the answer could easily be nothing. There doesn't need to be a deeper pattern here. I think as scientists, we should stop looking for one. Politics is not like Star Wars with the dark side and the light side. Politics is like Mean Girls, Game of Thrones, and Chimp Empire. Also, the American alliance structure is far from inevitable. The military is not always right-coded. There are many radical left-wing movements in Latin America, like Chavismo in Venezuela or Peronism in Argentina, that were actually led by former military leaders and championed a kind of militaristic socialism. College professors are not always left-coded. During the early 20th century, they supported the eugenics movement that involved an opposition to immigration because they were of inferior stock. Christian fundamentalists and big business, not a natural alliance by any stretch of the imagination. Religious traditionalism, including opposition to abortion and gay rights, is actually more often associated with left-wing economic views if you look across cultures, particularly in Central Europe and Latin America. The alliance between these two groups in America is quite unusual. Feminists and ethnic minorities. Surely they're natural allies, not necessarily. During the women's suffrage movement, many feminists actually excluded African Americans from protests and did not like the idea of Black men voting. Environmentalists, surely they're always left-coded. Well, no. During the 1980s and 1990s, Green parties in Central and Eastern Europe arose in opposition to Soviet industrial policy. The Soviets were not very eco-friendly. And these groups formed alliances with anti-communists and right-wing nationalists. This is true of Latvia and Estonia during this time period. The ethnic majority, surely they're always right-coded. Surely opposition to immigration and ethnic minorities is a right-coded thing. No. Economic leftism is often fused with ethnic nationalism. This was true of Australia's Labour Party prior to the 1970s. More recently, it's true of Slovakia's Direction Social Democracy Party and Italy's Five Star Movement. If you're an Italian and you're a socialist, you're likely to oppose immigration. Also, the alliance structure wasn't always like this. We have a historical record and we know that this isn't written in stone. At the beginning of the 20th century, the South was actually left-coded It was a Democratic stronghold. Southern Democrats were known as Dixiecrats. African Americans were actually more loyal to the party of Lincoln for understandable historical reasons. Devout Christians were actually evenly distributed between the parties. Religiosity per se was not a major political issue, although denominational differences mattered. Then in the latter half of the 20th century, we had some major political realignments. Democrats passed the Civil Rights Act, causing African Americans to shift into the Democratic Party and the South to shift into the Republican Party because the friend of their enemy is their enemy. Republicans took ownership of the pro-life side of the abortion debate in the 1970s, causing devout Christians to shift into the Republican Party and secular feminists to shift into the Democratic Party. Immigration from Latin America, coupled with the decline of manufacturing work and urbanization and educational inequality, led to the emergence of the quote-unquote white working class, who blamed globalization, elites, and immigration for their low and declining status. The opposite of this white working class, that is the highly educated, urban, quote-unquote professional managerial class, then shifted to the Democratic Party, and at the same time, increasing economic inequality, large corporations commanding a greater share of resources and political power led to conflict and competition, I think, between this professional managerial class and quote-unquote big business. From here, we can see how transitivity might have played a role. So there were political conflicts between African Americans and police officers. This may have caused Democrats to develop opposition to police officers because the enemy of their enemy is their friend. Republicans in turn develop allegiance to police officers because the enemy of their enemy is their friend. Police officers become right-coded. Wars against Muslim countries like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. This may have led the enemies of devout Muslims, namely devout Christians, to develop allegiance to the military, because the enemy of their enemy is their friend. And the enemies of devout Christians, namely the secular feminists we met previously, may have developed allegiance to Muslims because the enemy of their enemy is their friend. This is a particularly good example of a strange bedfellow alliance, given that Muslim countries are deeply patriarchal places. And so here it is again, the strange, peculiar political alliance structure of the United States. Now that we've gotten a good look at where it comes from, we can begin to ask the question, what are ideologies? Well, according to alliance theory, ideologies are not moral philosophies. They are instead collections of ad hoc justifications, rationalizations, moralizations, embellishments, and rhetorical tactics designed to advance the interests of complex political alliances in competition with their rivals. Moral differences, including moral foundations between partisans, these are overstated. They're not really playing a strong explanatory role in the contents of political beliefs. The primary difference between liberals and conservatives is not what values they hold, but whom they view as their allies. When heterogeneous groups cluster into political alliances, ideological inconsistencies are bound to arise. For example, if you happen to be allies with both wealthy business people and Christian fundamentalists, the peculiar Strange Bedfellows Alliance in the United States, then the principle of limited government may justify the interests of the former group, but not necessarily the latter group. That is going to lead you into some ideological inconsistencies. Let's take a look at some of these inconsistencies on the political right. Poor people in America have no one to blame but themselves. You hear a lot of this rhetoric on the political right, and unless they're working class white people, in which case they should blame immigration, international trade, and reverse discrimination. So what's going on here? How can we explain this? It's pretty simple, actually. Poor people, as we know, as we saw from the graphs, they're left-coded, often associated with ethnic minorities. Working class white people, on the other hand, are right-coded. We ought to have more respect for the American military, but not the FBI. What's going on there? The military is right-coded. The FBI investigated Donald Trump in 2017, causing Republicans to turn against the FBI because the enemy of their friend is their enemy. One of the biggest problems facing America is violent crime. but not gun violence. You might think they're similar, but they're actually not. Gun violence implies that gun owners are the problem and big government is the solution. Violent crime implies that inner city gangs are the problem and the police are the solution. With this subtle change in wordings, you are activating very different alliances in people's heads. Black Lives Matter protests are dangerous and divisive, but the January 6th Capitol riot was peaceful and patriotic. That one's pretty self-explanatory. And we must respect authority figures, except the IRS, EPA, CDC, NIH, or the UN. Here are some other examples on the political left. We should do everything we can to protect college students and people on social media from feeling unsafe. But we shouldn't care about police officers in dangerous communities who feel unsafe. College students are left-coded, police are right-coded. Poor people are not personally responsible for their financial problems. This is the opposite of the rhetoric we saw on the political right. But climate change deniers are personally responsible for natural disasters that strike their home. This is from a pretty interesting public opinion poll. We must stand in solidarity with labor unions, but not police unions. What's going on there? We should believe the sexual assault allegations against Brett Kavanaugh, but not the sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden. We must show empathy and love for all groups, except uneducated Southern working class, pro-life, devout Christians, business people, white people, men, members of the military, or Republicans. These inconsistencies fit better with alliance theory than with conventional approaches to ideology. If political belief systems are collections of ad hoc justifications designed to advance the interests of complex political alliances, then we should expect these inconsistencies. We should not be surprised by them. We should expect them in particular when the ad hoc justification that was designed to support a political ally is taken out of its proper context and applied to a political rival. This is exactly what we find in a variety of cases, which I reviewed in my 2023 paper. Conventional approaches to ideology centering on moral values really struggle to explain these inconsistencies. If we brought in Jonathan Haidt and asked him to explain these inconsistencies from the perspective of moral foundations theory, I bet he would have a hard time. Inconsistencies support alliance theory and challenge other approaches. Limitations. Of course, these inconsistencies are taken from polling data. Some of these inconsistent answers are actually coming from different polls. So we don't really know to what extent the same people are endorsing these inconsistent views. Ideally, we'd want within the subjects data. Luckily, I have some. So I conducted a set of public opinion polls as part of the Pulse of the Nation in association with the Cards Against Humanity Saves America campaign. The data I'm about to show you are dial-in surveys, nationally representative samples, 800 participants per survey. And the analyses are restricted to participants who identified as liberal or conservative. And all data are freely available for download at the Pulse of the Nation if you want to check it out. So do conservatives really value personal responsibility? I first asked the conservatives in my sample if they agreed with the statement, nobody deserves a free handout from the government. Usually this is in reference to poor ethnic minorities. Then after a few distractor items, I asked them if the government should do more to help small working class towns in America's heartland. And here is the Venn diagram between those two positions, with the majority of the conservatives in my sample agreeing with both of these statements. Do conservatives value free speech? I first asked the conservatives in my sample if they agreed that people should be free to express their political opinions in the workplace. Usually this is meant to refer to anti-woke people. Then I later asked whether athletes should be allowed to sit or kneel during the national anthem. Obviously, this is in reference to pro-BLM athletes. And here's the Venn diagram there, very large degree of overlap. Do conservatives value authority? People in this country need to have more respect for authority. Usually police or military is what comes to mind when we think of authority. Businesses should resist government regulations they think are unfair. Government regulators typically don't come to mind as often when we think about authority. And here's the Venn diagram there, with nearly 100% of the conservatives who agreed with that statement on the right also agreeing with the statement on the left. Do conservatives value liberty? The government should not place tighter restrictions on who can access guns. The government should place tighter restrictions on who can access pornography. Here's the Venn diagram there. Not quite as much overlap as in the other graphs, but still the middle choice is the most frequent of the three. Do conservatives value patriotism? We should be more suspicious of foreigners. I trust Vladimir Putin when he said he didn't interfere in the 2016 election. Vladimir Putin is a foreigner and a arguably very suspicious one. And yet we have this strong overlap between these two positions, with the middle one being the most common. Do conservatives oppose cancel culture? People should not be so easily offended. Black Lives Matter is offensive. Here's the Venn diagram there, nearly perfect overlap. Do liberals oppose stereotyping groups? I first asked the liberals in my sample. They agreed that it is wrong to endorse negative stereotypes about people based on where they were born. Usually this is meant to refer to immigrants. I then asked them if people from the South are racist. And here's the Venn diagram there, quite a bit of overlap, with most of the people agreeing with the statement on the left, also agreeing with the statement on the left, on the right, on the left. Men and women are equal in their talents and abilities. Women are better at multitasking than men. Here's the Venn diagram there. I asked a very similar question. Women in positions of power are better able to feel empathy than men. Nearly identical results there. Do liberals value outgroup tolerance? I first asked whether Muslims should be held responsible for terrorist attacks committed in the name of Islam. Seems like a pretty reasonable ethical principle that you wouldn't want to blame an entire group for the actions of a few violent extremists. I then asked the liberals whether Trump voters should be held responsible for the terrorist attack at Charlottesville. And here is the Venn diagram there, very large degree of overlap between these two positions. Do liberals value diversity? We should be more inclusive of people with different perspectives. Usually this is meant to refer to ethnic minorities. Liberal college students should not be inclusive of conservative speakers on college campuses. Here's the Venn diagram there. Here, this one's interesting. So only a minority of the liberals are actually agreeing with the statement on the right, which, depending on your perspective, might be heartening. But of the ones who do, nearly 100% of them are also agreeing with the statement on the left. Do liberals value bodily autonomy? A woman should have the right to do what she wants with her own body. This is a pro-choice slogan, as we know. People should not be allowed to sell their kidney. Here is the Venn diagram there. Very huge amount of overlap, given that women are people and kidneys are a part of the body. This is pretty inconsistent. Do liberals value equality? It is not fair that corporate CEOs are paid millions of dollars a year. It is fair that Hollywood movie stars are paid millions of dollars a year. Here is the Venn diagram there, with the middle being the largest group. So I want to end here with an example from the history of science. There political psychology. So I am proposing an alliance-centric model of political beliefs, which differs from the moral values-centric approach that is common in political psychology. When people were debating these two models of the solar system, the geocentric model was pretty awkward. It had a lot of weird loop-de-loops called epicycles that were just kind of hard to explain. And then Copernicus comes along and offers a more elegant parsimonious model where it's just concentric circles. I think that alliance theory is a good analogy. So if we take on board the moral values centric approach, we have a lot of weird epicycles and loop-de-loops to explain. And I've spent the better part of 20 minutes showing you these epicycles and loop-de-loops. I think we are in a position to let go of those epicycles and loop-de-loops and change to a more elegant parsimonious model where alliances are at the center of our political solar system. Now, I'm not arrogant enough to cast myself as the Copernicus of political psychology, but I do think at the very least that alliance theory is a step in the right direction, and I hope you agree that it is a useful and insightful perspective to take on politics.